to Third Ocean TV. My name is Karim Kanji. We have a very exciting show for you this week. Proper introduction as always, with over 15 years of information and communication technology experience. My good friend here, Andrew Jenkins, has worked with companies including World Bank, Britain's National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts. I want to ask about that. That sounds interesting. Rogers Wireless, Bell, InfoSpace, Compaq, HP, IBM, and Microsoft. Over the last 5 years, however, he's been focusing on social media strategy, which has become an increasingly larger part of his work, focusing beyond campaigns to the operationalization, that's a big word, of social media and the ongoing efforts required to turn an organization into a social enterprise. Please welcome Andrew Jenkins.
Thank you very much.
How are you?
I'm very well.
Excellent. How is this year treating you so far?
2013 is off to a very, very good start.
Nice.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, why don't we start from the beginning? We just read off your bio there. Plenty of experience in ICT, and then the last 5 years really with a focus on social media. Why did you make that switch?
Well, for the last 5 years, the focus has been predominantly around strategy and strategic planning. So that's been the baseline.
Okay.
And as social media was emerging and growing in maturity in the marketplace, what was becoming evident was a lot of companies, as they were going through their regular strategic planning and the strategy development, they were starting to layer on social media. And it was the bright new shiny thing.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of, as you know, a lot of organizations that ran towards the bright and shiny thing without a lot of forethought, without a lot of consideration and proper strategy development. And they were left bloodied for it.
Sure.
And when it comes to strategic planning, this is an organization's path to look at the next 3 to 5 years, make appropriate planning, put the appropriate resources in place, and the appropriate measurement. And as I'm sure you'll agree, those are critical things to have in place for social media.
That is true.
It made perfect sense as things evolved to layer on social media into the strategic planning discussion, and that's how the work evolved.
So when it comes to, you mentioned one of the things there when you're planning, that measurement came into play. I'm sure it's different for different types of companies and different brands, but what sort of things in common would you say, if there is anything, that these organizations want to measure?
Well, I'll take a step back.
Sure.
A lot of organizations, when you ask them, how well do you measure what you do now? Let's put social media aside.
Okay, sure.
How well do you measure the activities that you currently participate in?
Yeah.
And oftentimes people will look down because you've touched on something they all know that they do a very poor job, or it's ad hoc or haphazard when it comes to measuring their marketing and sales activities, or more broadly, their performance.
Sure.
And so, as I've said to a number of organizations that I've worked with, you cannot overburden social media to be your salvation. If you're not doing a good job of measuring how you perform in what came before social media, you're setting social media up to be a huge disappointment or a failure.
Yeah.
So that's where I think the aspect of strategic planning plays a critical role for them to recalibrate around how they monitor how they're performing, how they measure, how they record, or did they move the dial? So when it comes to social media ROI discussions and the associated measurement, if they've got the good measurement processes already in place, proving social media ROI shouldn't be that difficult.
Yeah. Well, you know, let's skip to that. Proving social media ROI shouldn't be that difficult. So, and this is going to start a huge conversation, I'm sure, or I wanted to, when we release this conversation. So the guest previous to you, Jamie Stein, social media manager for ING Direct Canada. We had a discussion last week, and we touched on ROI. We touched on both on his work previously with the Canadian Football League and currently with ING. And, and he'll correct me if I'm taking this out of context, but it seemed that he was of the opinion that there's certain things you can measure, but you won't get the full picture of ROI on social. One of the things that he mentioned was and you use the example of Twitter. Twitter is a platform that you can use, and you can pick whatever name you want. You just need to sign in with your email address. It doesn't have to be your main one, and you can create whatever persona that you want. So it's hard to figure out male, female, age, where are they from, what sort of insights can we get if a lot of people are utilizing various platforms without without their real personas there. What are your thoughts, when you say that it shouldn't be hard to measure social media? Maybe you can clearly define that and what things you can, what things you can't measure.
Well, I think the important part is, at the outset, is to design ROI into it. By that I mean closing the loop.
All right.
So you can have direct ROI results or indirect. And by that I mean, if we'll use financial services as an example,
sure.
You can have indirect ROI results from risk mitigation. So, a financial services company can have exposure if they are deemed to be non-compliant or they're not adhering to regulatory requirements. Each instance has some financial exposure from fines and other aspects. So if the adoption of social media in a proper way with compliance technologies in place and so on can help them address that exposure, that's an indirect return on the investment. So they've mitigated risk.
There you go.
That, on the direct side, there's driving cost out of customer service, because increasingly now people are migrating from making the phone call to initiating the customer service engagement with a financial services firm in social media channels.
Sure.
I mean, ultimately, under the umbrella of privacy, the resolution of that problem or that inquiry will end up happening in a private conversation, be it in a secure chat, or more than likely in a call center connection. But the path in that customer service inquiry or engagement can begin in social media channels. So driving out customer service costs as financial advisors and mortgage specialists are enabled to participate in social media, but in a compliant way. You'll see that increasingly being used for business development. For example, in the U.S., for the 401k, the Canadian equivalent to the
RSPs.
When someone changes a job in the U.S., that's a LinkedIn update in many instances.
That's right.
And that means that that person's 401k will have to roll over to the next employer. Not in every case, but in many cases. And as it's been referred to, that is deemed as money in motion. So if I'm a financial advisor and I see that update in LinkedIn of that particular person, if they're a client, or it's an opportunity to spark a conversation with them and potentially win them over as a client, because now they're in a state of transition. The money is in motion, and there's an opportunity to have a conversation. And that's where there is a direct correlation or ROI correlation between something happening in social media with a direct sales outcome.
Sure. And that's fantastic. I'm glad you brought those up. Sometimes when people talk about ROI, strictly they're looking at, if I'm going to spend $100 in social media, I want $101 coming back in sales or revenues generated. I'm curious what are your thoughts on social media as a sales channel? And I know you touched on LinkedIn as and using the example of financial planners.
Well, I think you hear a lot of talk about content marketing. One of the examples that I like to share, and I had the opportunity to interview the director of marketing from a company called Indium Corporation.
Okay.
And they specialize in solder paste, the paste that connects electronic components to assembly boards.
Okay, all right.
They have approximately a dozen engineers who write keyword-driven blogs related to solder paste and peripheral products and services. And their motto is content to contact to cash.
Interesting.
And one of their salespeople spoke to the director of marketing and said, the social media leads are the best qualified because they've spent more time on the website, they've read more information, and they were prompted to contact the organization. So if we look at social media's role in the different stages of the sales funnel, it's sharing content of value at the top of the funnel to stimulate inquiry, then helping them educate the consumer, be it B2C or B2B, through their education phase, ultimately converting them with an appropriate call to action, be it online or through a direct sales engagement.
Sure.
And then social can complement the experience they have with the company or its product or its service afterward. So amplify any praise that they're getting, and if there are any issues, to use the appropriate channels to rectify the situation.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, if someone has an issue and it's rectified, they become even a stronger advocate in social channels for the company.
Fantastic. So you've heard it right here, direct ROI.
Yes.
Utilizing social media. And that's important, and I'm glad that you brought up, when you have these conversations about measurement with these other companies, and they say, well, we haven't really been measuring that much.
Or doing it well.
Or doing it well. But it always seems that measuring an ROI is one of the first things out of their mouths when it comes to social media, even though they may or may not have been doing it effectively before.
But in fairness to them, this is something new.
Yes.
Something foreign still to many. And as well, there are some misperceptions that it is free. Or near free.
Yeah,
and,
that's right.
From my perspective, it is far from free. What people don't, sending a tweet in theory doesn't cost anything.
Yeah.
But the resource that sent it, and the time it took, or the cumulative time of manning a Twitter account on behalf of a company, that has associated costs.
Sure.
And the time commitment, there was a great quote in the last 2 weeks from Scott Monty from Ford.
That's right.
That social media is not a campaign, but a commitment. And I couldn't say it better. And there's associated cost for that commitment.
Absolutely. Let's go back. I was taking a look at your LinkedIn, and you, both in your intro and I mentioned it here, not really focusing too much on campaigns, but really building social enterprise. And that word's been used a bit last year. It seemed to be becoming more popular as a term. For those who don't understand, what is meant by social enterprise? Well,
I'm not suggesting with a social enterprise that everyone in the organization is tweeting.
Sure.
Or posting updates to Facebook. What I am suggesting is that an organization, as it becomes a social enterprise, and it's using that artificially created word operationalized social media, as it operationalizes social media and incorporates it into the day-to-day operations, everyone within the organization can derive benefit from its social activities without necessarily having to be a participant in the social channels. So if I'm in a product area, service area, I can be hearing about how our organization, our product or service is being discussed in social channels, how our competitors are being discussed, and that is relevant to my role and to the work that I do. And it informs what I may do from a revision of the product or revision of the service or forward-looking from a strategy decision point of view.
Perfect. And then on the customer service side as well, on the marketing channel as well, it's more...
You get a real-time pulse
of
how your company is being discussed. Are you seen as a thought leader, an employer of choice? How are you perceived in conjunction with your competitors? What sort of unmet needs or pain points are being expressed that will inform product and service development decisions?
And my follow-up question as I was planning this out was, why does it matter? But you've kind of touched on that, because you're able to, like you said, real-time insights, real-time pulse on a company, on a product, on their service, and really on anything. So I think I'm in agreement with you that it's important for organizations and companies to take a look at how they could really integrate social media, not just in a specific channel or in a specific division, but throughout the organization as well. Recently you were head of social media strategy for RBC. What? It might seem obvious, but why are banks interested in social media? What are they looking to drive from it?
Well, banks and other financial services companies are interested in social media for a variety of reasons. The aforementioned risk management, reputational management, and addressing the demand that's coming internally from people like financial advisors and mortgage specialists that want to be enabled to use social technologies to engage their customer base, to remain competitive. And then on the flip side, the external stakeholders, customers, are increasingly wanting to engage the companies they do business with in a social context rather than in conventional communications terms.
Have you seen any examples, whether it's in the financial industry or elsewhere, where organizations were either too slow or didn't put any importance or high enough importance or priority in social media, and whereby whether it's a client of theirs or someone who's interested in the product, tweets out or messages them in these public spaces, and them just not being there and responding to that? I don't know if you...
Well, I mean, there are numerous examples in the financial services sector of organizations that, they're coming late to the game.
Yeah.
And with all due respect to the financial services organizations, many of them are, centuries old.
True.
So you have to think about, an organization, and some of the telecoms here in Canada are over 100 years old. You have a century-old organization trying to adopt a new way of thinking and a new way of operating that is less than a decade old, if you don't count blogging.
Sure.
So, that's a dramatic shift in a very, very short period of time. Kudos, though, to the industry, because there's a recognition that there is a desire, both internally and externally, for the organization to become more social, and they're taking the necessary steps. Some of them, there's a spectrum. Some are doing it very conservatively, and there are some from examples from around the world that are being very, very bold.
Wait, let me ask you, which ones would you feel, and I don't necessarily want you to say RBC or not, but it doesn't really matter, but which financial institutions would you say are really doing some innovative things?
Two that I strongly admire, actually I'll give you three.
Sure.
Commonwealth Bank in Australia, they crowdsource ideas for new products and services.
Okay.
It's called, I think it's IdeaSource.
Okay. And IdeaSource is a microsite of sorts?
It's a part of their online presence, and they are soliciting from their customers input related to product and service improvement on net new services. Another favorite is First Direct out of the UK.
Okay.
They displayed their sentiment score in real time on their website.
Interesting.
That blatantly transparent.
Interesting.
They presented video clip testimonials of customers, satisfied and dissatisfied. They had scrolling quotes from customers, both satisfied and dissatisfied. And they had a program where they would pay you £100 if you liked them, and £200 if you didn't. So if at the end of 6 months you were unhappy with the service that you acquired from them, they would pay you £200 to move to
close your account,
another financial institution. And I thought, very forward-thinking, very bold. And they had an online community called Little Black Book.
Okay.
And it blatantly says so on the website, this is not about banking. This is to enable our customers to form a community where they can share valuable insights to one another. And there was nothing more than
about anything.
About anything.
Interesting.
And the other example, it's an emerging one out of Amsterdam called Knab. It's bank spelled backwards.
Knab. Okay, there you go.
And this is a newly formed bank. It was founded by someone who had founded a trading company to disrupt the stock brokerage business. It was very successful, sold that, and now he wants to disrupt banking. And so Knab's model is, and they blatantly tell you, we are more expensive than other banks. And here's why. Because we're not going to call you to upsell you.
Interesting.
So they'll charge a premium for a subset of services that others might get from another bank, but by paying that higher fee, you're avoiding the nuisance of constantly being called by your bank to get a credit card or to be upsold on this or be upsold on that.
And so are they focusing just on core services and no
periphery? In fairness to their competition, they are online only. They don't have any physical branches.
Sure.
But this is, these are some of the attributes of their that are being disruptive. And I'll give you one sort of 3.5 examples. There's an insurance company out of the UK called Debit, and they Debit Insurance, and they focus on motorcycle insurance only. So
Interesting.
what they did was they set up an online community site for motorcycle enthusiasts.
Yeah.
It mentions debit on its branding,
Yeah.
but that's it. There's no prompt to buy insurance or anything like that. It is about information for people who want to map an excursion in the UK and Scotland, etc. There's a community of enthusiasts that you can talk to and share tips on. If you're taking this particular route, here's a B&B to stay at, those kinds of things. So it's just for enthusiasts to share, motorcycle travel related information. And the halo effect is that debit is seen in a different light than other insurance companies might be seeing.
Now, you've given 3 European examples.
Right.
One example from Australia. Is that just a coincidence that none of them are North American, or is there a difference in the way things are done here versus the way things are done overseas?
It could be coincidence. I mean, there are examples in North America where examples like Chase Community Giving. They've established a Facebook page. It is not about banking at all. It's crowdsourcing, again, that same term, but in this case, it's crowdsourcing votes from the community on where they should make donations.
And that's it.
And that's it.
Interesting.
So again, the conversation I usually have around Facebook and B2B is more about using Facebook as a way to humanize the organization. Show how you're giving back to community. And this is where some banks, Chase included, and even RBC through their RBC Hockey, which is about community hockey and grassroots, showing how they are operating within the community and giving back and facilitating childhood dreams in the case of hockey, those kinds of things. And that's where Facebook, from a B2B context or financial services, is tending to play a stronger role.
Interesting. I wasn't necessarily looking for North American examples.
No, but there are.
Yeah.
But when you use the word bold, some of the early examples I gave are the ones that come to mind, at least for me.
Yeah. Let's get away from banking specifically. Actually, very, very quickly, because I said it off at the beginning. Britain's National Endowment for Science, Technology, and the Arts. What's that organization about? I'm very curious.
Well, for Canadians and Torontonians, it's very similar to the Mars project here, or the Mars organization here in Toronto. NESTA facilitates collaboration between academia, the private sector, and the public sector.
Okay.
And I've got a strong interest in innovation. And when I was just starting to get into consulting, I, through LinkedIn, came to connect with someone who was working at NESTA involved in innovation, and struck up a conversation about what the organization was doing in the innovation space, and maintained and nurtured the relationship. And some months, probably almost a year later, after initially meeting them, they commissioned me to do a research project on social networks. What they were looking at, and similar to what Mars does here, is they will fund the exploration of ideas. And so they were looking at whether or not at the time social networks, as they were emerging, would constitute the new city.
Interesting.
And so I looked at the predominant social networks of the day. Now this is...
Which were?
This is 5 years ago. So, and I remind people, 5 years ago, MySpace was bigger than Facebook.
Sure.
So MySpace, Facebook, Classmates.com, LinkedIn.
Classmates.com, wow. That's right, I forgot about that.
And there were others, Friendster and so on, Orkut, Bebo, and Twitter was just starting. It was 6 to 8 months old. So looking at all of them under the umbrella of governance, commerce, demographics, and a variety of other attributes, and how those attributes reflected city-like qualities, and how they differed. Do social networks organize themselves like cities do in neighborhoods? Do they organize differently? What sort of governance or power do factions within. So I know that sounds rather academic or theoretical, but it was a fascinating opportunity to do a deep dive on all of them at the time, and that was the groundwork that has informed a lot of the strategy work that I've done in the social media space ever since.
That's fantastic. Let's look back at 2012. Okay. What innovations, what campaigns, what transpired that really impressed you?
Well, the one thing, and it's top of mind of late because I've been talking about it in some of the presentations and conversations that I've been having. Mm-hmm. What really stood out for me, especially as 2012 was wrapping up, was the level of maturity that Twitter has achieved. And what I mean by that is the embeddedness that it has as a utility, where you have the likes of certain governments asking Twitter not to shut down for maintenance because there are movements afoot in the world where it could be an outlet for communication, and where you have the likes of the Israel Defense Force declaring war via Twitter on Hamas, and you kind of go, well, a lot of people historically were dismissing Twitter as, people just talking about making a sandwich, that never-ending joke. Yeah. And I show the slide, or a screenshot of the tweet from the Israel Defense Fund with Hamas's response. You kind of go, this is no longer talking about making a sandwich. Yeah. There's been a dramatic shift in the utility that Twitter has become. Now, that's not to say that those same characteristics or attributes aren't there in the other social media channels. It's just that Twitter really stood out in that context for me.
Interesting.
And you're seeing the gun debate happening there as a result of the sad events towards the end of the year.
Sure.
And so there's some polarization happening in social channels. Mm-hmm. Now, some people are hiding behind their computer screens and being somewhat extreme in their commentary, but
yes,
just part of it.
I'm curious what your thoughts are. Facebook for when you take a look at what they're doing, how can they monetize their platform? They're always looking at that. What tweaks can we make? What small little innovations can we make to the Facebook platform that is going to help monetize them? And so you have a lot of companies, whether it's advertising on them or building out campaigns and so on and so forth. Twitter, you see news organizations use them to report on news. You see conversations happening on there. Like you say, you got governments not wanting Twitter to, like you said, to do maintenance on it so they can see what's going on in Saudi Arabia and such. I'm very curious, and I know they're different platforms, so people use them differently, but people really use Twitter differently. So it's not a place, it seems to be more conversational than Facebook generally. Right. So I'm very curious, do you think as a platform, Twitter will be more of a place, more of the world's bar or sandbox where people go to talk rather than a place where this bank or that car company can go to sell more of their products?
Well, I think a lot of people on Twitter are net listeners. Twitter is a great amplifier and distributor of content and information, but to your point, there's still an attribute of real-time conversation from mobilizing people in a quick way. CNN was crowdsourcing photographers to use the hashtag CNNI report as they took pictures during the hurricane. So you have this utility, in this case Twitter, being used to mobilize people that are distributed, where the historical media cannot get there fast enough, don't have enough resources to reach there. So this is where another attribute of this innovative shift because of social media. But this idea of monetization, when we have to remember when Facebook was first conceived, it was not conceived with a business model in mind. It was true to facilitate the meeting of people in academic circles, and then it opened up to other academic institutions.
I don't think academic was in Zuckerberg's vocabulary.
Well, I mean,
oh, I understand.
Not that it was just circumstantial. It was academic institutions, and then it went public.
Yeah.
So what's happened over the last number of years is they've retroactively applied a business model to it, and with that, they're constantly making new attempts to monetize.
Yeah.
Contrast that with LinkedIn, which from its beginning was conceived with a business model in mind.
True.
And associated revenue, and you can see that translated in its stock price.
Yeah.
And even though now it's crossed 200 billion, it's a fifth the size of Facebook.
True.
But Facebook is playing that role of bringing together. It's a two-sided business model. They're bringing together the eyes to advertisers, and so they're trying to monetize now that audience. But someone said recently, if you're not being charged for the product, you are the product.
Of course.
And so that's where you're going to have people who, with this love-hate relationship with Facebook, they love the fact that they can stay connected with their world and get reconnected with old friends from high school. But the byproduct is that they're going to have to put up with pushed content to them. And as you see increasingly, people that I haven't talked to on Facebook in 6 months, I don't see them anymore. Well, because of EdgeRank playing its role. Right. Well, you then look at, if people gradually shift over to Google Plus, and I'll see every update from every person that I'm connected with.
Yeah.
Is that what I want, or is there somewhere in the middle? It's hard to say.
Interesting.
With the Facebook's announcements today about search and so on. What does that mean in terms of, as I'm making inquiries, is it going to push different content to me as it relates to search? I don't know. Facebook doesn't have that real-time conversation that Twitter does. It's just each of the social networks or social platforms have their strengths.
Yeah.
They have their weaknesses. The 800-pound gorilla is Facebook.
Yeah.
But here it is, 7 years old, and it is, it's making money, but it's continually trying to evolve how it monetizes.
Interesting.
Because a lot of people are saying it's given its size, it should be making more than it is. But
it isn't. There's tons of questions I want to ask you, Andrew, but the battery on my camera is going to run out. But very quickly, and you may have mentioned it with Facebook's announcement today, and for those watching, it'll be a week later. But very quickly, with this new year, halfway through the first month of the new year, what things are you looking forward to in 2013 as it pertains to innovations in social media, whether it's new tools coming out or whether it's new ways that people or businesses or movements are utilizing the platforms?
I think it goes back to what I was saying, where we saw Twitter, for example, becoming more of an embedded utility at the end of 2012. You're going to see social become more embedded. You're going to see more organizations operationalize social. You're going to see more enterprises become social enterprises. That's what I'm excited about, and I think there's a lot of promise in 2013 because a lot of organizations who've been, shall we say, kicking the tires in the years to date, they can no longer ignore the importance, the growing pressure to become more social. Their customers are demanding it, their employees are demanding it, and again, even if they do nothing more than start listening, there's still value to be derived from it.
Interesting. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. If people want to connect with you online, where's the best place to connect?
I am A. Jenkins on Twitter, and my company website is Volterra Consulting.
Perfect, and we'll make sure that we put links to that in our show notes. Sure. Again, Andrew Jenkins from Volterra, and his Twitter handle is A. Jenkins. My name is Karim Kanji. You can follow me at Karim Kanji on Twitter, and go check us out online at thirdocean.com, and we look forward to chatting with you next week. Bye-bye.